Okay, I have a story time for you guys tonight, and it is the story of Iroh. Iroh is the son of Firelord Azulon and grandson of Firelord Sozin. He was the first son of Azulon, and eventually he would become Firelord, is what it was supposed to be. Iroh, we don't know too much about his early life, right? But we know that Iroh rose to the rank of general, and he actually seen battles. For his father and for his nation, he fought against, the Earth Kingdom, trying to expand the empire of the Fire Nation, right? At the same time, Iroh, I believe this started after his son died. Iroh was older than his brother Ozai. He had a son that was named Luton. Luton was also a warrior soldier just like him. He died at Ba Sing Se, and he failed to capture Ba Sing Se. But even with all that shit going on in his life, you know, you know, his son died, so he was kind of, fucked up for a while. But his brother used that as a means to be like, my brother has no more heirs. His son's gone. I have two healthy children right here. You know, and he's like, Zulon's like, no, you don't do that shit to me. That's your older brother. He's gonna be Fire Lord after you. So Ozai did other things on the side and basically killed Zulon so he could become Fire Lord. Since there was nobody there, he was already off at war, you know. But at some point in time, he became a philosopher or a guy who wanted to know and like understand people a little bit, not just his nation, basically, right? But like other people's too. And he learned things from the waterbenders. He learned about how they use their techniques, and that'll come into play later in his life, right? He met other people. He became a member of an organization called the White Lotus at some point in time. He came back to the fire, and he basically was there for Zuko. Azula, she's kind of a girl who really takes to her father. Him and Ozai don't see eye to eye, but Iroh's also a guy who he's not trying to go against his family, but he knows, other things. Zuko's a good guy, right? But Zuko shouldn't go into a conference that's serious for the Fire Nation. Fire Nation. They wanted to, basically get the job done at whatever cost, But we have to sacrifice 100 men to get the job done. That's what has to be done. And Zuko's like, no, we don't have to, do that. He's like, but before he goes in there, he's like, you okay? You don't gotta be so nervous, Prince Zuko. Just be there and, put your head down and like, sit and watch, what your father does and shit. And he's like, he can't shut up. And he's like, no, don't send those guys to die. His father then scars him and then tells him, he's banished until he can find the Avatar. Sends his, son to go find the Avatar, who hasn't resurfaced yet. See, he had been gone for 3 years, but Iroh was with him the whole time. Iroh was with his nephew through all those hard times. And he's like, take your time, let's, try to still, enjoy life. Kind of basically like trying to lead him towards like, we're on this like journey to find the Avatar, but like, let's be in the present and let's see what's going on right now. And in time, the Avatar might show up. He's not really push him away from the Avatar necessarily, but he's still trying to like get him to like focus. Basically, his focus was trying to get Zuko to think for himself and live his own life. You're honor this, you're honor that. But you, Prince Zuko, are you, right? You don't need to do what your father wants. Will that bring you? Will that actually bring you fulfillment? You know, are you just fulfilling what he wants? And he was there for him like that. So then Aang shows up. When Avatar Aang shows up, I was like, well, damn. You have the Avatar, and I get to see the Avatar, and he's just some young boy. I'm like, he's kind of like, respects him and other things, but he also understands, he is a firebender and he is helping his nephew out. So he's going to help him catch the Avatar. Boom. But he got away. And Iroh was kind of seeing it as, maybe it's not supposed to be. Maybe you're not meant to do this. And Zuko's like not having it. He's like, no, 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 we're going to hunt this guy down. So, he's with his nephew through all this. He's like, okay, you want to find the Avatar. But, this. And, he's basically trying to get him to see, other things. Not just, finding the Avatar. Here and there, right? Dropping, wisdom on him. You should take some time to smell the flowers while you're out. Don't let that mission consume you. You still have a life. Of your own. And he's doing that the whole time. They even go to this girl and they're like, I need to, get the Avatar sent. He helped him with that. He wasn't, any type of way. And then like later on, Zuko tries to like when at the end of book one, he's trying to get Aang, right? And he's like, make sure you do your firebending and shit, because it's cold as fuck here. You could easily die in this place. If you don't know what you're doing. And he's like, I'll be all right. I'll catch the Avatar and other things. And he's like, you better come back alive, kind of shit. He also we find out that he understands, like, shit like that, the importance of the spirits. He's like, don't fuck with the spirits of the fucking water tribe, that is, a spirit that, you shouldn't fuck with, that'll bring imbalances to the world. You shouldn't do shit like that. Jow. And he's like, I don't care, I'll kill it anyways. And then he's like, I'll fucking, and he goes off on him. He starts attacking Zhao because, he did that shit. And now, basically, the spirit, there's like imbalance. He knows that, But, they get through that situation. And then Azula appears. Azula is coming to basically be like, Zuko, you've taken too long with, getting and capturing the Avatar. You can either, help you or, basically I'll take this shit over. I'll just do your job for you. Um, she tried to kill Zuko and Iroh, and Iroh was able to redirect lightning, and they got away. They became fugitives. They were acting like fire or Earth Nation citizens inside the Earth Kingdom. They kept a low profile and other things. Eventually, they met Azula again. They tried to stop her from finding the Avatar. And like during book two, this is where he's like really like, he's like, the four nations, are four nations, different elements. You know, but you could, learn things from other people's, I learned the lightning bending or the redirection of lightning from studying the, you know, water benders and how they move. And he's like, I can teach you how to learn lightning too. And it would be useful because the sister is a crazy bitch. Like, he understands that shit about Azula. And he's like, she might come at you or some shit, and you might need it to protect yourself, not necessarily to use against like the Avatar or any shit like that, you know. And he's like, it's a dangerous technique, and it's not for everyone. He teaches him, you know, those basics, take it through your arms, down through your stomach, not your heart, and then out the other end, because that's where your, solar plexus, your, energy comes from, you know. Um, we got that from him. Then they're going to Boxing Day. And for like a time, it's like he forgot all about it. Like almost like it was there, but it wasn't like important at the time. They saw Jet. Jet saw them, boil tea. And like later on, he comes in the city and he's like, God damn, those are firebenders. And like for a while, they've been there. I don't know how long they've been there for, but for a couple weeks and shit, they were, doing, they had tea, and this girl came and approached Zuko, and he's like, oh, my nephew could probably, use some time away from this tea shop. He can go out and have a date with you. You might as well do that, Prince Go. And he's like, okay, and he does that, and he's like, he kind of forgot about Aang for a little bit, and it gets to the point where he's like, I'm freeing the Avatar Sky Bison. Why the fuck am I doing this? He's like, and Iroh's like, yo, you gotta like start thinking for yourself and start like, making your own decisions, being your own man. You've seen like things, basically like, are you gonna let that stop you from what you want to do, or are you gonna just, fold? And basically, Zuko did end up folding, but he felt bad for it. And Iroh was taken, right? He was captured by Azula, and then he was in confinement. He was in prison. He was walking back as a hero, and then he was taken as prisoner. He went and talked to Zuko. Zuko was like, I need your help. I don't know why I feel this way. I feel so, fucked up for, because they were together for 3 years. He helped him through all that. And he's just like, you could have shared in this glory with me. And he's like, you didn't get the point at all. He couldn't talk to him. It ain't that he didn't want to talk to Zuko. He was just like, you missed the whole point. And he's like, you know, dreading not talking to him because he does want to help, but he's like, he doesn't understand yet. Zuko then goes and does some things, and he's like, you found those things, and I'll tell you something, right? So basically, your great grandfather on your dad's side is Sojin, but your great grandfather on your mother's side is Avatar Roku. And then he was like, oh shit, are you fucking kidding me? And he's like, yes, but sometimes you have to, go through some things, do some things. Um, Iroh was already gone by the time Zuko tried to leave. He was like, the guy was, the guy was like, he was like an animal. He was a monster. Not like an animal because like he was acting like a, he lost his mind and shit. Like when the one guy brought him food, and when the other the girl brought him food, he was like, thank you, you've been treating me with respect, ever since I came in here, I like how you've been treating me, and everybody else, treats me like lower than shit and other things, right? And he got out of there, he busted out of there. We don't see him again until later, and Zuko finds him and he's like, he's like afraid to go in there. And he's like, I'm proud of you for what you did, right? You finally, found your purpose, and you did it on your own, and he did do it on his own. And that's what he wanted for, Zuko. He didn't want to, like, force him. And he wasn't ever really forcing him. He was just like, Zuko, there's more going on than this, what your dad wants you to do. And what are you trying to do, you know? And he finds out, what his destiny is from everything he learned from, his falls and, Zuko. And, Iroh then went into Bossing Say, not to conquer it, but to free them from the Fire Nation, you know. it was funny for his journey because remember at the beginning of this video I said how he was trying to conquer boxing say back in his younger days, but then at the loss of his son, and it just didn't happen. It was conquered by the Fire Nation, and now he was saving them. He was helping them get their kingdom back. You know, Iroh was a good guy, and like he eventually he got a tea shop, his own little tea stand, and other things, and Bossing Say, and eventually he passed away at an old age, I guess. And I say that because he was old when he died, and he was pretty old anyway. But we see him again later in Avatar Korra, as a spirit. He's able to walk around amongst the spirits in the spirit world. And he manifested, and he was like, yeah, I knew Avatar, and other things, and he's teaching her about, when you have negative emotions, bad shit happens to you, right? But when you have positive emotions, positive things happen to you. He teaches her that little secret, right, about how things work, you know. And yeah, he's basically a spirit now, and he's still dropping wisdom even as a spirit. People love Iroh, and he's a great character. I ain't gonna say he's like my favorite character, but I do like him. He's not my, like, he ain't a character that I fucking hate. You know, but yeah, I'm glad that he did that shit for Zuko. Zuko became a better man because of his uncle. You know, but let me know what you think about Iroh in the comments below. And be cool on the corner and watch Avatar 2. Watch like any of it. Just watch the regular series first though. Try to watch the regular series first. It's not long or any of that shit, right? It's technically a cartoon. But I'm like I'm one of these fools out here that's like saying that shit's an but you guys, be cool on the corner and definitely watch Avatar: The Last Airbender and watch anything like that. The live action, and then they got the new movie coming out. That's what I mean by that. Any of the works they got coming out, because it's like a cool franchise, man. And it's technically a cartoon, probably the best cartoon of all time. In my opinion. And other people's too. But yeah, see you in the next one.